Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for over 15 years, guiding thousands of families through moments of joy, competition, and occasional unexpected revelations on his stage. Throughout his extensive career in television, he had witnessed the complete spectrum of human emotion and family dynamics, from celebrations of unity and love to uncomfortable moments when private struggles surfaced in public settings. However, nothing in his considerable experience could have prepared him for what would unfold on that October afternoon in 2024, when a wife's desperate decision to expose her husband's secret addiction would transform a game show taping into an intervention that would move Steve Harvey to tears and demonstrate the devastating impact that hidden compulsions can have on families who love someone struggling with addiction. The Anderson family from Cleveland, Ohio, stood ready to compete against the Nguyen family from Portland, Oregon, both families presenting an outward appearance of enthusiasm and stability as they prepared to participate in America's most beloved game show. Yet beneath the carefully maintained facade of normalcy, a crisis was unfolding that would soon explode into public view and reveal the terrible cost of secrets, addiction, and the desperate measures that families sometimes take when trying to save someone they love from destroying themselves and everyone around them. If you value authentic stories about families facing addiction and the courage required to confront destructive behaviors even when doing so feels impossible, please take a moment to engage with this content by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel for more powerful narratives about real families navigating the most difficult challenges life presents. Daniel and Christine Anderson had been married for 18 years, though the foundation of their relationship had been crumbling for the past 3 years under the weight of a secret that Christine had been carrying alone until this moment. Daniel was 45 years old, a skilled electrician whose steady employment had provided for his family throughout their marriage. He presented as a responsible husband and father, the kind of man neighbors would describe as reliable and hardworking, someone who went to work every day and came home to his family every night. Christine, 42, worked part-time as a dental hygienist while managing the primary responsibilities of raising their 2 children and maintaining their household. She stood beside Daniel on the Family Feud stage, appearing composed and pleasant, her smile practiced and her demeanor carefully controlled, despite the turmoil that had been consuming her for years. Their children completed the family lineup. 15-year-old Ryan stood tall and proud to be representing his family on national television, completely unaware of the crisis that was about to unfold before millions of viewers. 12-year-old Emma displayed the natural nervousness of a preteen on camera, but showed no indication that she understood the devastating revelation that was minutes away from shattering her understanding of her family and her father. Daniel's brother Marcus, 38, rounded out the 5-person team, included in the Family Feud appearance as a way to make it feel like a broader family celebration, and perhaps to provide some buffer or normalcy to what Christine was planning to do. What the studio audience and viewers at home could not know was the devastating reality that Christine had been living with for 3 years, a reality she had hidden from extended family, friends, neighbors, and even her own children in a desperate attempt to protect Daniel's reputation and give him opportunities to address his problem privately before it destroyed everything they had built together. 3 years earlier, Christine had discovered that Daniel had developed a severe gambling addiction that had started innocuously with occasional sports betting and lottery tickets, but had escalated into a compulsion that now consumed their finances, threatened their home, and placed their entire future at risk. The discovery had begun with small inconsistencies that Christine initially dismissed or rationalized. Money would go missing from their joint account with vague explanations about work expenses or emergency repairs. Credit card bills would arrive showing charges that Daniel could not adequately explain. He would receive phone calls that he would take in private, speaking in hushed tones that suggested secrecy rather than normal business or social conversation. Christine had initially attributed these anomalies to work stress or perhaps some surprise he was planning for her birthday or their anniversary, trusting her husband and believing in the solid foundation they had built over 15 years of marriage. The truth had emerged accidentally when Christine answered a phone call intended for Daniel from someone demanding payment for gambling debts that had gone unpaid for months. The caller was aggressive and threatening, making clear that Daniel owed substantial sums of money to people who were losing patience with his promises to pay and his continued failure to deliver on those commitments. The call had sent Christine into a state of shock and confusion. Unable to reconcile the responsible husband and father she thought she knew with this revelation of hidden gambling and mounting debts that apparently threatened their financial stability and potentially their physical safety. When Christine confronted Daniel about the phone call and demanded the complete truth about their financial situation, what she learned devastated her understanding of their marriage and their life together. Daniel admitted that he had been gambling regularly for years, starting with small bets that had seemed harmless but escalating into a compulsion he could not control. He had lost tens of thousands of dollars that he had hidden from Christine by manipulating their accounts, taking out secret credit cards, borrowing from friends and coworkers with fabricated stories about family emergencies or investment opportunities, and ultimately resorting to high-interest loans from predatory lenders when legitimate sources of credit had been exhausted. Their savings had been depleted. Their retirement accounts had been raided. Their home equity had been borrowed against without Christine's knowledge through forged signatures on documents that Daniel had somehow managed to process. They were drowning in debt that Christine had not known existed, living in a house that was at risk of foreclosure, facing financial ruin that Daniel had created and hidden through years of deception and compulsive behavior. The revelation had shattered Christine's sense of security and trust in ways that felt almost impossible to recover from or repair. The man she had trusted with her life and the lives of their children had been lying to her for years, making financial decisions that affected the entire family without her knowledge or consent, placing them all at risk for the sake of feeding an addiction he apparently could not or would not control. Christine had demanded that Daniel seek treatment immediately, that he attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings, that he work with a financial counselor to develop a plan to address the debts and rebuild their destroyed finances, that he be completely transparent about every aspect of their financial situation moving forward. Daniel had made promises and commitments that he failed to keep with heartbreaking consistency. He would attend a few Gamblers Anonymous meetings and then stop going, claiming he had the problem under control and did not need continued support. He would provide financial statements and account information that later proved incomplete or deliberately misleading, continuing to hide debts and losses that he apparently believed he could win back through just one more bet or one more calculated risk. He would promise transparency, and then Christine would discover new evidence of continued gambling, whether through credit card charges at casinos, betting apps on his phone, or conversations overheard that made clear he had not stopped engaging in the behavior that was destroying their family. Christine had tried everything she could think of to help Daniel and protect their family. She had taken over complete control of their finances, requiring Daniel to turn over his paychecks and giving him only a small allowance for necessary personal expenses. She had installed monitoring software on his phone and computer to track his activities and identify any attempts to access gambling sites or applications. She had contacted gambling addiction specialists and arranged interventions with family members and close friends, hoping that collective pressure and support might break through Daniel's denial and resistance to genuine treatment. She had threatened divorce, separation, and exposure of his addiction to their children, and extended family if he did not commit fully to recovery and financial accountability. Nothing had worked. Daniel would appear to comply for weeks or even months, attending meetings and providing requested information and demonstrating what seemed like genuine commitment to recovery. Then Christine would discover evidence of relapse, whether a hidden phone that Daniel used for placing bets, withdrawals from accounts she had not known existed, or debts from new sources that Daniel had found to exploit despite her attempts to close off access to money and credit. The cycle of promise and failure, hope and devastation, had repeated so many times that Christine no longer believed Daniel was capable of stopping his gambling through his own willpower or desire to protect his family. The Family Feud appearance had been scheduled during one of Daniel's periods of apparent compliance and progress, arranged by Marcus, who thought a fun family experience might help strengthen family bonds and give everyone something positive to focus on rather than the ongoing stress of addiction and financial crisis. Christine had agreed to participate with profound ambivalence, knowing that she was approaching a breaking point in her ability to continue managing Daniel's addiction in private while protecting his reputation and maintaining the facade of a normal family for the sake of their children and extended family relationships. In the weeks leading up to the taping, Christine had discovered the most devastating evidence yet of Daniel's continued gambling and the depths of deception he was willing to practice. She had found documentation showing that Daniel had taken out a second mortgage on their home without her knowledge or consent, using more forged signatures and falsified documents to borrow against equity that should have been protected for their children's education and their own retirement security. He had immediately gambled away the borrowed money, losing it in less than a month through a combination of casino visits and online betting that had produced no wins and only mounting losses that now threatened their ability to keep their home at all. Christine had reached her breaking point. She recognized that her attempts to help Daniel privately while protecting his reputation and maintaining family stability had failed completely, and that continuing on this path would only enable his continued gambling and deepen the financial hole that was swallowing their future and their children's security. She made a decision that she knew would be viewed by many as cruel or inappropriate, but that she felt was her last desperate attempt to force Daniel into genuine treatment and accountability. She would expose his gambling addiction on the Family Feud stage, using the public setting and the presence of cameras to create a moment of crisis that Daniel could not minimize, deny, or escape through his usual patterns of promises and temporary compliance followed by continued deception. The game began with the usual Family Feud energy and production quality that had made the show beloved by audiences for decades. Steve Harvey engaged both families with warmth and humor, creating an atmosphere of fun competition that put most contestants at ease and allowed them to enjoy the experience of being on national television. The Anderson family performed adequately in the opening rounds, with Daniel providing reasonable answers and appearing relaxed and confident despite whatever internal awareness he might have had about the precarious state of his finances and the secrets he was keeping from most of the people who loved him. It was during a commercial break in the third round that Christine made her decision to execute the plan she had been contemplating and dreading for weeks. As the production crew attended to lighting adjustments, and Steve Harvey consulted with producers about the next segment, Christine approached Steve directly and asked if she could speak with him privately for just a moment about something urgent and important. Steve, sensing the seriousness in Christine's demeanor and tone, agreed immediately and stepped aside with her to a corner of the stage where they could speak without being overheard by the other family members or the studio audience. Christine spoke quickly and with visible emotion, her words tumbling out in a rush as she explained to Steve Harvey what she was about to do, and why she felt it was necessary despite knowing how inappropriate and painful it would be for everyone involved. She told him about Daniel's gambling addiction, about the 3 years she had spent trying to help him privately while he continued to lie and gamble and destroy their financial future. She told him about the second mortgage and the forged signatures and the imminent threat of losing their home. She told him about her fear that Daniel would never seek genuine treatment unless forced into accountability through public exposure that made denial impossible and made the consequences of his addiction undeniable and immediate. Steve Harvey listened to Christine's explanation with an expression that shifted from initial confusion to dawning comprehension to profound sadness as he understood the weight of what she was carrying and the desperation that had brought her to this moment of choosing to expose her husband's addiction on national television. When Christine finished speaking, Steve was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing what he had heard and considering how to respond to a situation that went far beyond the normal scope of game show hosting and entertainment television. Steve spoke to Christine with gentleness and compassion, acknowledging the impossible position she was in and the years of pain and struggle she had endured while trying to help her husband and protect her family. He also gently questioned whether the Family Feud stage was the right setting for this intervention, whether exposing Daniel's addiction so publicly might create more damage than healing, whether there might be better ways to force accountability and treatment that would not involve humiliating Daniel in front of millions of viewers, including their children and extended family, who apparently had no knowledge of the severity of his gambling problem. Christine listened to Steve's concerns but remained resolute in her decision. She explained that she had tried every private intervention and ultimatum and consequence that she could implement, that Daniel had proven repeatedly that he would make promises and appear to comply while continuing to gamble and lie, and hide the extent of his addiction and its impact on their family. She believed that only public exposure that made denial impossible and created immediate accountability might break through Daniel's defenses and force him into genuine treatment and recovery. She acknowledged that what she was planning was harsh and potentially damaging, but she felt that the alternative of continuing to protect Daniel's secret while he destroyed their family was worse and more damaging in the long run. Steve Harvey made a decision in that moment that reflected both his compassion for Christine's desperate situation and his recognition that what was about to happen would fundamentally change the nature of the taping and potentially traumatize everyone involved, including the children who had no preparation for what their mother was about to reveal. He told Christine that if she was determined to proceed with exposing Daniel's addiction, he would support her by providing structure and guidance to the intervention rather than allowing it to become chaotic or purely destructive. He would help create space for Daniel to respond and, hopefully, to accept the help he clearly needed. He would ensure that resources for gambling addiction treatment were immediately available and that the family received support for dealing with the aftermath of such a public revelation. When taping resumed after the commercial break, Steve Harvey addressed the studio audience and explained that something unexpected and serious was about to occur that went beyond normal game show content. That what they were about to witness was a family in crisis, and a wife making a desperate attempt to save her husband from an addiction that was destroying their lives. He asked the audience to be respectful and compassionate in their response to what was about to unfold, to recognize that they were witnessing real pain and real struggle rather than entertainment designed for their amusement. Steve then invited Christine to speak, and the atmosphere in the studio shifted dramatically from lighthearted competition to somber anticipation of something serious and potentially devastating. Christine turned to face Daniel directly, her voice shaking with emotion but her words clear and determined as she began to speak the truth she had been hiding for 3 years. Christine told Daniel that she could not keep his secret any longer, that she could not continue to protect his reputation while he gambled away their future and placed their children at risk. She detailed his gambling addiction in specific terms, describing the depleted savings, the secret debts, the forged signatures on the second mortgage, the lies and broken promises that had characterized the past 3 years of their marriage. She told him that their home was in jeopardy, that their children's college funds were gone, that their retirement security had been destroyed by his compulsive gambling and his refusal to seek genuine treatment and accountability. Daniel's face went through visible transformation as Christine spoke, initial shock and denial giving way to embarrassment, and then to something that looked like devastation, as he realized that his carefully maintained secrets were being exposed in the most public way imaginable. Ryan and Emma stood frozen in horror as they learned for the first time about their father's addiction and the financial crisis that had been hidden from them. Marcus looked stunned and betrayed, apparently having had no knowledge of the severity of Daniel's gambling or the extent to which it had damaged the family he thought he knew. When Christine finished speaking, the studio was silent except for her quiet crying and the sound of Emma sobbing as she processed what she had just learned about her father and her family's situation. Steve Harvey stood with tears visible in his eyes, clearly moved by the raw pain and desperation he had just witnessed, and by the terrible burden that Christine had been carrying alone for so long while trying to save her husband and protect her children. Steve approached Daniel with compassion rather than judgment, his voice gentle but firm as he addressed a man who had just been confronted with the consequences of years of deception and addiction. He asked Daniel if what Christine had said was true, if he recognized the severity of his gambling addiction and the damage it had caused to people who loved him and depended on him. Daniel nodded without speaking, unable or unwilling to attempt denial or explanation in the face of such specific accusations delivered with such obvious pain by his wife. Steve spoke to Daniel about addiction and the importance of genuine treatment rather than continued denial and half measures that inevitably failed. He shared briefly about his own family's experiences with addiction and the years of pain and struggle that had taught him that addiction could not be overcome through willpower alone, that it required professional help and sustained commitment and complete honesty about the problem and its impact. He told Daniel that what Christine had just done, however painful and humiliating it felt in the moment, was an act of love and desperation from someone who refused to watch him destroy himself and his family without making one final attempt to force him into the help he needed. Steve then turned his attention to Christine and acknowledged the impossible position she had been in, and the courage it had required to make such a difficult and potentially relationship-ending decision, to expose Daniel's addiction so publicly. He validated her exhaustion and frustration after years of trying to help Daniel privately while he continued to lie and gamble. He also gently suggested that moving forward would require professional family therapy to address not just Daniel's gambling addiction, but the broken trust and communication patterns that had allowed the problem to grow so severe before being addressed openly. The taping was stopped, and the Anderson family was escorted to a private area where they could begin to process what had just occurred without the pressure of cameras and studio audience. Steve Harvey spent over 2 hours with the family, connecting them with gambling addiction specialists who could provide immediate assessment and treatment recommendations for Daniel. He arranged for family therapy services that could help Christine and the children process the trauma of the revelation and the years of hidden crisis they had been living through unknowingly. He provided financial counseling resources that could help the family develop a realistic plan for addressing the debts and potentially saving their home despite the damage Daniel's gambling had caused. Daniel was admitted to an intensive outpatient gambling addiction treatment program that same week, finally acknowledging that he could not control his gambling through willpower and that he needed professional intervention and support to address the underlying issues that drove his compulsive behavior. Christine began individual therapy to address her own trauma and to work through her feelings about Daniel's deception and her decision to expose his addiction publicly. Ryan and Emma entered counseling to help them process their father's addiction and the financial crisis that had emerged from years of secrets and lies. The episode never aired in its original form. Steve Harvey and the production team made the decision that broadcasting Christine's desperate intervention and Daniel's public humiliation would serve no positive purpose and might actually harm the family's recovery process by making their private struggle into public spectacle. However, Steve did address the incident in general terms during a later episode, discussing the impact of gambling addiction on families and the resources available for people struggling with compulsive gambling and the family members trying to help them recover. 6 months after that devastating day on the Family Feud stage, the Anderson family remained together, but their future was uncertain, and their recovery was ongoing and difficult. Daniel had maintained his commitment to treatment and had not gambled since the public intervention, attending daily Gamblers Anonymous meetings and working with a therapist to address the anxiety and escape-seeking behaviors that had driven his gambling compulsion. Christine was working through her anger and broken trust through therapy while trying to rebuild some foundation of honesty and partnership with Daniel. The children were healing slowly from the trauma of learning their family had been in crisis without their knowledge. The financial recovery was slower and more painful than the emotional work. The family had lost their home to foreclosure despite their best efforts to negotiate with lenders and work out payment arrangements. They were living in a small rental apartment while trying to pay down the debts that Daniel's gambling had created and rebuild savings that would eventually allow them to purchase another home. Christine had increased her work hours to full-time to help address the financial crisis. Daniel had taken a second job in addition to his regular employment, dedicating every available dollar to debt repayment and demonstrating through concrete action his commitment to repairing the damage his addiction had caused. 1 year after Christine's desperate intervention on the Family Feud stage, Steve Harvey invited the Anderson family to return for a private meeting to discuss their progress and their ongoing journey toward recovery and healing. What he found encouraged him despite the obvious struggles and setbacks the family continued to face. Daniel had maintained his sobriety from gambling for an entire year, the longest period he had gone without placing a bet in over 5 years. Christine spoke about slowly rebuilding trust and beginning to believe that Daniel's commitment to recovery might be genuine and sustainable this time. Ryan and Emma were doing better emotionally and had developed a more realistic understanding of addiction and its impact on families. The family spoke openly about the continued challenges they faced. Financial recovery would take years, if not decades, given the extent of the debts and the lost assets that would need to be rebuilt. Trust in the marriage was fragile and would require continued work and honesty to maintain and strengthen. The children still struggled with feelings of betrayal and confusion about how their father could have hidden such a serious problem for so long. But despite these ongoing challenges, there was a foundation of honesty and accountability that had not existed before Christine made her desperate decision to force the crisis into the open. Steve Harvey reflected in later interviews about that day and the impossible choice that Christine had felt forced to make between continuing to protect Daniel's secret while he destroyed their family, or exposing his addiction in the most public way possible in hopes of forcing genuine change. He acknowledged that reasonable people could disagree about whether public intervention was appropriate, or whether it crossed lines that should be maintained even in desperate situations. But he also recognized that Christine had tried everything else available to her, and that her decision came from a place of love and desperation, rather than cruelty or desire for revenge. The Anderson family's story became part of broader conversations about gambling addiction and the devastating impact it can have on families who love someone struggling with compulsive behaviors they cannot control. Treatment centers and support organizations reported increased calls from family members seeking help for loved ones with gambling problems after word spread about what had occurred during the Family Feud taping. The incident highlighted the need for greater awareness about gambling addiction as a serious behavioral health issue that requires professional treatment rather than moral judgment or belief that willpower alone can overcome deeply rooted compulsive patterns. For Christine specifically, the decision to expose Daniel's gambling addiction on the Family Feud stage remained complicated and emotionally fraught even as it appeared to have achieved its primary purpose of forcing Daniel into genuine treatment and accountability. She lived with guilt about the public humiliation she had caused and the trauma her children experienced learning about their family crisis in such a dramatic way. She questioned whether there might have been better options she had not considered or whether she should have been more patient with Daniel's recovery process. But she also recognized that years of private intervention had failed and that her desperate public act had broken through Daniel's denial in a way nothing else had managed to accomplish. If this story has reinforced your understanding of the devastating impact that addiction can have on families, the impossible choices that loved ones sometimes face when trying to help someone who continues destructive behaviors, and the importance of professional treatment and sustained accountability in addiction recovery. Please take a moment to like this content and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about families navigating their most difficult challenges with courage and determination, despite the pain and uncertainty that recovery requires.